Higurashi's final episode, Matsuribayashi, serves as one hell of a grand finale for the original storyline of the visual novel, coming hot off the heels of one of the most shocking reversals of fortune, that is Minna Goroshi, wherein what seemed like a conclusion primed for a euphoric and well-earned victory quickly dissolved into utter devastation as the true villain was revealed, ending in everyone's swift and remorseless execution. Matsuribayashi then proceeded to mark the culmination of Rika's 100 years of struggle by bringing Hanyu, the missing piece of the puzzle, into play, thus enabling Rika and her closest friends and allies to upend the mastermind's fiendish plan and finally break free from the eternal summer of 1983. But what most fans don't know is that there exists a parallel alternative ending to the original Higurashi storyline. And I'm not talking about Saikoroshi, as that vignette is, in essence, little more than a short excursionary epilogue. No, I'm talking about a full-length episode that was conceived with the express intention of being played in lieu of Matsuribayashi, standing completely on its own as an entirely original narrative that follows a radically different sequence of events, but still culminating in Rika's long-awaited showdown with Takano. Its very existence is undeniably fascinating, an anomaly even in the world of visual novels, which are notorious for their convoluted branching storylines. So this video will be delving into this curious, little-known gem in Higurashi's vast compendium, as it deserves a lot more love and attention for successfully crafting an explosive, ambitious, and triumphant denouement of its own, while remaining every bit as poignant and memorable as the original. Miotsukushi Hen, which translates to waterway exhausting chapter, referencing a Japanese pun which means to give one's all, hinting at the manner in which the events of this chapter will unfold, was first created as the finale for Higurashi's first console port, Higurashi Matsuri, in 2007 for the PS2, completely replacing the final chapter, Matsuribayashi Hen, for this version of the game. That's right, it wasn't just tacked on to the end of episode 8 as an additive entry akin to a bonus unlockable true ending, as Matsuribayashi isn't even anywhere to be found in the port, thereby making Miotsukushi the official finale to anyone who had first become acquainted with Higurashi through this particular version of the game, which I'm sure kicked up quite a deal of commotion and confusion if these readers ever tried to reconcile what they had experienced with the OG fans who had worked their way through the original sound novel on PC. In 2010, when Higurashi was ported to the Nintendo DS in the form of Higurashi Kizuna, its final entry included both Matsuribayashi and Miotsukushi, further confusing the situation. Additionally, the Kizuna version of Miotsukushi is intertwined with the DS port exclusive Advance story, resulting in a different version of Miotsukushi than what was presented in Higurashi Matsuri, a revamped Miotsukushi version 2.0 if you will, that contains a number of differences, some trivial and others quite significant. So for the sake of simplicity, I'll be focusing on the DS port of Miotsukushi, also known as Miotsukushi Omote, though what I cover in this video applies broadly to both versions. Like the rest of the console exclusive arcs, Miotsukushi is not penned by Ryakishi 7, but instead by Kano Kichi, who is the scenario writer for much of the rest of the console exclusive content, in addition to the scenarios for the 2020 Mobage, Higurashi Mei. However, it was reviewed by Ryakishi and given his formal stamp of approval, making its canonicity a topic for debate. Thanks to the likes of Saikoroshi to a lesser degree, and to Higurashi Go to a much larger degree, however, Miotsukushi is all but confirmed to be non-canon, as several of the ways in which it deviates from Matsuribayashi contradict the foundation, the storyline's ending state, if you will, that these follow-on offerings are based on. Of course, thanks to the existence of the Dean-exclusive Yakuza Mashi, which was clearly influenced in part by console-exclusive content, specifically Taraimo Washi, I won't completely rule out the possibility of Miotsukushi or elements of it being carried forth into future adaptations, but at least at the time of this recording, we'll designate this material as non-canon. For those who view the story of Higurashi as a sea of fragments instead of a linear timeline, you can think of it as kind of sort-of-ish canon. Regardless of its canonicity, rest assured that Miotsukushi was handled by extremely capable hands, as, like with all the console-exclusive arcs, Kichi's writing more than meets the lofty, laudable standards of any of Higurashi's official content. So without further delay, let's dive into the episode. One quick disclaimer before we start. Spoilers are inevitable, so if your curiosity in Miotsukushi has been piqued in any capacity by this point, I would highly recommend you go ahead and read through the episode yourself first, likely through the unofficial 7th mod, as it has yet to see an official translation as of the time of this recording. That said, I deliberately spare a lot of the specific details of the more climactic moments, so there will still be quite a bit left to experience when trekking through the episode proper. Miotsukushi opens in stark contrast to Matsuribayashi, with Rika awakening in a panic, as Hanyu, who could always be found right there by her side, is nowhere to be seen in this new fragment. Also omitted is the entirety of Takano's backstory, as Miotsukushi instead jumps straight into the usual after-school club shenanigans. Included is a new subplot which brings with it a distinct air of finality to the overarching narrative, as Mion announces she is relinquishing the title of club leader to focus on her entrance exams, and passes the torch to Keiichi, something that gives way to a flurry of disastrous misunderstandings, with Mion shouldering the brunt of the fallout. The perspective then shifts to Keiichi, who approaches Rika, finding her adrift in this world without Hanyu. Like Matsuribayashi, Rika knows Takano is her killer and knows of her plan to mobilize the mountain dogs to eliminate anything standing between her and Rika, but without Hanyu as an anchor to rally her friends and allies, Rika's counterattack begins on much rockier footing, as she must first seek out and gain the trust and confidence of her allies, one by one, before she can even dare challenge the villainess. Rika begins by revealing her knowledge and secrets to Keiichi, believing him to be the most generally reliable across all fragments, and indeed, this world's Keiichi comes across to Rika as unusually stalwart, the reason behind which is revealed to her later on. In any case, the always venturesome and headstrong Keiichi accepts Rika's plea for help, and the two protagonists set out on their most daunting and perilous challenge so far, as they quickly discover this fragment to be unlike any Rika has experienced in the past, where the flames of the conflicts that had doomed several of the previous 7 worlds have been rekindled and threatened to ignite all at once in a sadistic twist of fate. The first hurdle for the underdog duo to clear is the issue of professional con artist Rina Mamiya, who has once again made her way to Hinamizawa and quickly found her first target for extortion, Rena's father. Having stumbled upon some damning intel gathered through Shion's connections, Rika and Keiichi proceed to confront Rena about the true nature of Rina's character. This is likely similar to how Rena gracefully resolves the issue in the canon arcs, where she instead chooses to confide in Mion, as it only makes sense that she would obtain confirmation of Rina's unscrupulous dealings through the same omnipresent Sonozaki hive mind. The difference here in Miotsukushi is Rika and Keiichi bringing the issue directly to Rena, ratcheting up the tension and stakes significantly as Rena finds herself overwhelmed, initially unable to bear the thought that her father would be naive enough to have fallen for a swindler. Rena's knee-jerk reaction, her stubborn refusal to discard her faith in her father, is, of course, born out of her desire to protect her family, her precious status quo at all costs, having sacrificed so much, having thrown away the entirety of her past to forge this new idyllic life in Hinamizawa. But without going into detail, the resolution involves Rena's acutely perceptive and instinctual side prevailing over her paranoia, and she accepts the terrible situation for what it truly is, placated by some much-needed words of comfort and encouragement from the magician himself, in a direct callback to the climax of Sumihora Boshi. But of course with Rina comes her co-conspirator Teppei, who resumes his abusive reign over Satoko. Keiichi and Rika manage to catch him red-handed, but find themselves decidedly outmatched and at the mercy of Teppei and his goons, until a familiar face, someone who is likely no stranger to bailing out a certain ragtag group of troublemakers, arrives just in time to help even the odds. Of note is that there is an almost throwaway line implying that the most efficient method of thwarting Teppei involves finessing the law a bit, which would seem to go against Ryukishi's principle of accurately portraying the procedural rigor that police have to abide by. But for those who have read the advanced story, this minor act of bureaucratic disobedience ties in quite nicely with the theme of corruption from within the system, where sometimes the only solution to bring justice to those who already have their hooks in the upper echelons is to stop playing by the rules. Shifting gears now to Shion's perspective, in this arc, despite her sisterly interactions with Satoko, she still finds herself existentially strained due to the disappearance of Satoshi, emphasized by a flashback to an all-familiar cathartic reconciliation between her and Mion. On the night of the Watanagashi festival, while wandering near the Irie clinic, she happens to overhear a discussion involving the fate of Satoshi, prompting her to uncover the truth on her own, where her choices lead her worryingly down the path of her Meikashi counterpart, as she forces Irie at gunpoint to bring her to where Satoshi has been kept. Though their one-sided, tear-slicked reunion is similar to Matsuribayashi, the circumstances surrounding it are far more hostile, with Shion barely able to restrain herself from executing Irie for his role in stashing Satoshi away as a guinea pig for his admittedly critical experiments on Hinamizawa syndrome. This is how I feel Shion's reunion should have unfolded in Matsuribayashi, as it's a sort of continuation of Meikashi, with bitterness and betrayal twisting Shion's rampant devotion to and obsession with Satoshi into pure vengeance. The sheer depths of Irie's guilt are also explored, as he makes it abundantly clear that he's perfectly willing to give his life as retribution for the pain he has brought Shion and the Hojo family. I won't say how this face-off resolves, but I will instead remark that Satoko earns a defining moment of character growth of her own, as she is finally given the opportunity to bear her own conflicted emotions towards Irie's treatment of her brother, as well as acknowledge her own complicity in the situation, in a downright inspiring show of composure, empathy, and courage. Under the orders of Takano, the Mountain Dogs begin their operation in earnest. They proceed to take Satoko hostage, offering to return her safely if Rika willingly gives herself up. For all the Mion fans out there, this leads to a phenomenal and empowering standoff where she earns her stripes as the Sonozaki's successor by personally standing in defiance against her mother, Akane, on behalf of her friends, in a bid to rally support against the Mountain Dogs for the sake of Satoko. In other words, for the Hojo family, the pariahs of Hinamizawa, mirroring Keiichi's impassioned plea in Minagoroshi. This may be the single most pivotal contribution from this episode, as, similar to Satoko, Mion's character arc had felt sorely incomplete without the opportunity to accept and overcome her chronic insecurities in an electrifying display of candor and ironclad determination. With all the hurdles finally cleared, the climactic showdown with Takano commences, this time starting off with a classic hostage exchange on the steps of the Furude Shrine. As with every hostage exchange, things quickly take a turn for the unexpected, and as per Matsuribayashi, the club members retreat to the woods where our beloved trap master is waiting to make short work of Takano's supposedly highly competent counterintelligence unit. We now arrive at the in-game, where the Mountain Dogs are called off by Tokyo, and the Bloodhounds arrive to pin the blame on Takano as the scapegoat. But the final confrontation plays out with a different cadence, as Rika faces a broken and battered Takano mostly alone, with only her closest ally by her side. Takano, though initially every bit as obstinate and trigger-happy as in Matsuribayashi, eventually relents this time around when confronted with the weight of her sins, shouting for the Bloodhounds to execute her right there on the spot. Again, I won't spoil how this showdown resolves, but suffice it to say, the end result is a major deviation from Matsuribayashi, as it presents the de facto counterpart to the perfect world with no losers that Rika sought so desperately to create. Whereas Matsuribayashi aligns with the club's preferred variant to Old Maid, where adding in an additional card, that is, Hanyu, completed the world, Miotsukushi conversely represents the original game, where someone must bear the sacrifice in order to effect real progress, to keep everyone moving forward. I do think the miracle of Matsuribayashi holds more true to the overall trajectory of Higurashi, but that doesn't compromise the beautifully tragic and poetic irony that is Miotsukushi's ending. Though tears aplenty are shed by all is not lost, as the closing credits feature one final surprise in the form of the episode's final deviation from what is currently known to be the canon storyline, a joyous and long overdue reunion that heralds nothing but hope for the road ahead. The goal of Matsuribayashi was to be a raucous celebration, as the fragment itself was destined to be perfect from the moment it was created. The real struggle came in the form of Rika looping through all the previous worlds in search of this one special fragment. While this does result in a clear through line, there's something so inherently, viscerally exhilarating and heartfelt about cheering Rika and Keiichi on as they fight tooth and nail, clawing their way up and out of a chasm of hopelessness, and then through a cavalcade of escalating, destructive, and deeply personal conflicts, each of which managed to bring the entire village to ruin, once upon a time. Watching the two of them cultivate and culminate their indomitable bond of friendship and extend a hand to all of their closest friends, pushing them to confront and prevail over their own internal tribulations. All of it brings a sense of much-needed closure, weaving together a cohesive tapestry out of what had previously been a series of disparate narratives. Higurashi at its core has always been about its characters and the struggles they face, and it's immensely gratifying in the graduation ceremony sort of way to watch them grow, acknowledge, and conquer their own demons, and in doing so, reach that sense of self-acceptance and belonging they all so desperately yearn for. But while I personally prefer Miotsukushi over Matsuribayashi, I won't deny that the overall narrative just plain doesn't work without an extended trip through Takano's backstory. It's absolutely necessary to understand her deep-seated motivations, how her upbringing, mired in tragedy, gave way to her formidable tenacity, and why Rika chooses to take pity on her in the inn, in spite of her abominable actions. None of this is given adequate screen time in Miotsukushi, as only a few sparse details alluding to Takano's past and her devotion to her grandfather can be gleaned from her Hinamizawa syndrome-induced ramblings, which is a monumental disservice to the fully realized version of her in Matsuribayashi, especially as it detracts from her ability to come across as a worthy foil to Rika, taking much of the impact out of their final confrontation. But in spite of this, and in spite of scenes such as this one, which are just plain impossible to compete with, Miotsukushi is still very much worth a read, with the caveat that you should have already experienced Matsuribayashi before giving it a shot. Out of all the additional chapters and arcs added by the numerous adaptations, the OVAs, the console ports, the manga anthologies, I would put Miotsukushi at the top of the list of bonus content for fans of the original storyline. Despite not being written by Ryakishi, it displays an impressive grasp and deep understanding of Higurashi's complex cast, and handles their irreplaceable camaraderie and the resolution of their character arcs with utmost finesse and respect. If you felt Matsuribayashi came up short in any category, like you felt that there were dangling plot threads that were left unaddressed, or heck, if you've just maybe always wondered what the good ending version of the likes of Meikashi, Sumihoroboshi, and Higurashi would look like, then Miotsukushi may give you the closure you've always been looking for.